A poor waitress in a world of the rich and arrogant. She came here every day just to survive, not to dream. But one night everything changed. A woman walked into the restaurant, fiery, confident, and completely deaf. The billionaire's son was confused. The staff froze in panic. And then she stepped forward. Quiet girl. No one noticed that she began speaking in sign language, as if opening a door to a new world. In that second, the billionaire's son saw not a poor waitress, but someone who heard the heart. Even when there was absolute silence around, from that moment their destinies became intertwined, and no one could ever break that connection. The woman signed again. "This is my son, his name is Daniel." Daniel, Lyra repeated to herself. The name sounded too beautiful for an ordinary restaurant guest and too cold for a person who had just been speaking rudely on the phone. He slightly tilted his head as a greeting. "And what is your name?" "Lyra," she answered softly. "Have you worked here long, Lyra?" he asked, clearly trying to make conversation, but the sound of his voice echoed in the air like a metallic thread. "Almost a year. And do you really know sign language?" He looked so intently, as if trying to read her secrets. "Yes, I studied it once," she nodded briefly. His eyebrows raised slightly, but he said nothing more. He just kept looking at her, as if she were a puzzle he never expected to encounter. Lyra hurried away so as not to feel herself under the spotlight of someone else's attention. She returned only when the order was ready. She placed coffee in front of the woman, the salad beside it. And suddenly the woman touched her hand, making Lyra look up. On the guest's face was a quiet, kind gratitude. "You are very kind," she signed. Lyra just smiled, feeling a slight tremor, as if someone had seen her soul. When she was already walking away from the table, the administrator Christina jumped up to her, almost stepping on her dress. "Have you lost your mind?" she hissed. "Are you trying to play the Good Samaritan? Do you even know who they are?" "No," Lyra answered honestly. "They're the Grumoffs," Christina whispered dramatically, as if that name should tear through the air like lightning. "Her husband is a billionaire, owner of a hotel chain, and that son of hers is the future heir. And you're waving your hands at them. She's deaf." "I noticed." Lyra tried to speak calmly. "I don't care." Christina threw up her hands. Such people don't like being reminded of their shortcomings. Lyra felt an unpleasant cold in her chest, some unfair, sharp feeling. "I just wanted to help," she said quietly. But Christina had already left, throwing an irritated sigh. Several minutes passed. Lyra attended to another table but felt a gaze. She looked back and sure enough, Daniel was watching her, not taking his eyes away. Every time their eyes met, he seemed to be trying to understand something. Too intensely, too personally. She inevitably blushed. When she approached them again with water, the woman wrote something in her notebook and passed it to her son. He read it, smirked, shook his head, but smiled so softly that Lyra couldn't believe her eyes. There could be tenderness in him. Then he stood up and approached her where she stood at the counter. "I have a request for you." Lyra froze. "Could you stay with us a little longer? Mom wants to talk. And I." He paused for a second. "I don't always keep up. She sometimes signs too fast for me." Lyra looked at the woman. She was looking at her with hope. And how could she refuse? Who could? "Of course," Lyra said. And for the first time in a long while she felt needed. They talked for almost half an hour. The woman told stories through signs about music she couldn't hear but felt with her heart. About travels, about youth, about her beloved son. Lyra translated for Daniel, and he listened, sometimes laughing genuinely, without arrogance. And the more Lyra looked at him, the more surprised she was. That coldness from the beginning started to melt. At one moment the woman signed. "I like you. You have kind eyes. Such people are rarely trusted. Don't stop being yourself." Lyra couldn't respond. A lump suddenly stuck in her throat. No one had said such words to her in so long. When dinner came to an end, Daniel paid. Without a tip. He just silently signed the receipt and put away his card, as if everything ended exactly as it should have. But before leaving, his mother stood up and hugged Lyra, strongly, warmly. And Daniel quietly said, "Thank you for the evening," and left. Lyra remained standing, still feeling the embrace on her shoulders. The night was already late when her shift ended. Lyra went outside, sheltering from the November cold in a thin jacket. The wind cut to the bone. She thought this day was over. But as soon as she took a few steps, a black car pulled up to her. The window rolled down. "Lyra," said a familiar voice. "I'll give you a ride." She froze in confusion. Daniel sat inside, still reserved but already without that cold mask. "You have a long way to go," he added. Lyra hesitated only a moment, then got in. And from that moment, her life could never be the same. The car moved smoothly. The interior smelled of expensive perfume and a light scent of leather upholstery. Lyra sat by the window, trying not to meet Daniel's gaze, though she felt he was looking at her. "Do you live far?" he asked calmly. "In a residential area in Sokol." "It's not quite the center," Lyra answered, embarrassed. "It doesn't matter to me. You should be comfortable." She stayed silent. Nothing in Lyra's life had ever worked out to be comfortable. She was used to getting home by bus, freezing on the way. And here were leather seats, soft light, and the heir to a huge empire who suddenly showed care. "You know," he slowed his speech, as if choosing words. "You did something important today." Lyra turned. "What exactly?" "Mom has been avoiding public places for a long time, feels cut off from the world. And today she laughed, smiled. And it's all thanks to you." Lyra felt warmth rising to her heart. "I just knew how to say good evening to her." He looked at her more attentively. "Sometimes one good evening is worth more than millions." Lyra didn't know how to respond to such words. They sounded too sincere. When the car stopped at an old brick 5-story building, Lyra already regretted that the ride was ending. "Thank you for the ride," she said, about to open the door. "Wait." His voice sounded firm. "Can I ask one more question?" He turned. "Of course. Are you working tomorrow?" "Yes. We'll come again." "Mom," he smiled slightly, "insists." Lyra also smiled, unable to hide her joy. "Then see you tomorrow." Daniel watched as she got out of the car and climbed the steps. And only when the entrance door closed did the car quietly drive away. But Lyra stood for a long time in the dark hallway, leaning against the cold wall, her hands still trembling with excitement. Something was beginning. She felt it with her whole heart. The next day Lyra came to work early. She secretly fixed her hair, checked her uniform in the mirror, and caught herself laughing at how nervous she was. Christina, noticing her fussing, raised an eyebrow. "Going on a date or something, sunshine?" "I just don't want to mess up," Lyra muttered. "Oh, looks like the Grumoffs really got to you," the administrator snorted. "Just remember, these are different worlds. They have billions, we have dirty dishes." Lyra sighed and didn't argue. During the dinner hour, the restaurant door opened, and Lyra immediately recognized them. The woman smiled when she saw her. Daniel also noticed her instantly. Today he looked different, more relaxed, without phone calls and a tense face. Lyra led them to the same table. And again the communication began, a lively, warm conversation with signs and words. The woman told stories about the son she loved more than anything in the world. Her eyes shone with pride. "He works too much," the mother sighed. Daniel smirked. "Translate correctly for her, Lyra." She probably said, "He's the best." "Almost that," Lyra smiled mysteriously. The woman confirmed this with animated hand movements, and all three laughed. At one moment the mother went to the restroom, and Lyra and Daniel were left alone. Silence hung between them, but it wasn't awkward, rather filled with anticipation. "Mom has become very attached to you," he said first. Lyra shyly lowered her gaze. "She's wonderful." "Yes, but her loneliness." He fell silent, as if afraid to open up too much. I want her to have joy in life. She found it in you, Lyra said softly. And in you too, he added. Her heart beat a little stronger. When dinner ended and they were about to leave, the mother warmly hugged Lyra again. And Daniel took out a business card. If you ever need help or just want to talk, he became slightly embarrassed. I'd be glad. She took the card, holding it as carefully as if it were a precious stone. Something flared inside her, and when the car drove away, Lyra remained on the sidewalk, happy and scared at the same time. At home she put the business card under her pillow, not to call, but to feel hope nearby. But she didn't know that hope can be fragile. A week passed. The Grimoffs didn't appear again. One shift, second, third. Time dragged on as if on purpose. Lyra began to think that all this was just a coincidence, one small flash in her grey routine, until one evening a man in a strict suit approached her, the driver, the same one who drove the Grimoffs. Are you Lyra? He asked. Yes. Mrs. Gromova sends you an invitation. Lyra felt her heart hit against her ribs. Where? To their home. Tomorrow evening. She went numb. But why? The driver only smiled slightly. Perhaps fate wants your story to continue. All night Lyra couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and repeated to herself, this is a dream. This is just a dream. But in the morning the dream turned into reality, and that reality was leading her straight to the billionaire's house, to a person who had already settled in her heart. The Grimoff's house turned out to be not just big, it resembled a castle of modern glass and steel. Huge windows, quiet lanterns along the path, tall firs. Everything seemed distantly luxurious, as if from another world. Lyra felt like a small dot amid wealth where she had no place. The door was opened by a butler, strict, almost emotionless. You are expected, he said and led her inside. The hall was enormous. The walls were decorated with paintings by famous artists, but Lyra looked only at one figure, the woman sitting on a soft sofa. Daniel's mother joyfully rose and hurried to her, greeting her with signs so warmly as if they were old friends. Lyra smiled in response, translating, I'm so glad to see you. Me too. At that moment Daniel appeared. His steps were confident, but something soft appeared in his gaze when he saw Lyra. You came, he said quietly. I was afraid you would refuse. I was afraid too, she admitted. He led her to the living room. The table was beautifully set with tea, pastries, fruits. The atmosphere was surprisingly homey. The mother clapped her hands with joy when Lyra translated her quick signs. They laughed, discussed everything from weather to childhood memories. And Daniel watched more and more, not his mother, but Lyra. When the mother went to rest, they were left alone in the spacious room with huge windows. The silence was too loud. She's become very attached to you, Daniel began quietly. And I to her, Lyra answered honestly. He smiled barely noticeably. Thank you for coming. Lyra blushed. I was afraid I would look like a stranger here. You're not a stranger here, he said softly. At least not to her. He paused, then added almost in a whisper, and not to me. Lyra felt her breath catch. Her heart beat painfully, too sweetly. But before she could say anything, a man in an expensive gray suit burst into the room. His face looked like a stone mask. Daniel! His voice rang with displeasure. What is she doing here? Lyra immediately understood this was the father, that same billionaire. Daniel straightened up. She's a guest. Mom's friend. Friend. The man looked at Lyra with contempt. A friend from the service staff? Daniel, have you completely lost your mind? Every word was like a blow. Lyra went numb, unable to even defend herself. But Daniel raised his head. His gaze became hard. I invited her. Is this how you care for our reputation? The father said coldly. Why is my wife socializing with a waitress? The word waitress sounded like an insult. The mother appeared nearby, saw the tension, and quickly began signing angrily and clearly. Lyra translated. She's kind. She listens to me, and I feel calm with her. The father snorted contemptuously. I'll hire her a professional interpreter. We don't need help from people like her. The mother waved her hands again. Her face turned red with anger. Daniel translated his mother's words. Leave her alone. The father raised his eyebrows. Daniel, you're starting to forget your place and the company you're supposed to inherit. I'm also a person and can choose who will be in my life, the son said firmly. It was a challenge, the most dangerous one. The father clenched his fists. As long as I'm alive, no. He looked at Lyra as if she were a mistake that needed to be erased, then left, leaving behind an icy silence. Lyra stood, not knowing where to put herself. She felt dirty, small, humiliated, as if she had been trampled just because she wasn't born into the right family. I'm sorry, I'd better go, she whispered. Daniel quickly stepped forward and took her hand. No, please don't go. Don't think you did anything wrong. But your father, he's right. I'm nobody. A waitress. Tears welled up in her eyes. He gently lifted her face with his hand. To me, you're not a waitress. You're the one who brought joy back to my mom, and you're important to me. Those words were dangerously beautiful. A tear fell from Lyra's eyelash. Daniel wiped it with a gentle movement of his thumb. The distance between them disappeared. The world narrowed to breathing. Lyra suddenly understood she was falling in love. Without a secure future, without guarantees. Simply with her whole heart. Late in the evening he put her in the same car. I'll call you, he said before she got out. I promise. Lyra nodded, but inside her fear was already rising. What if his promise was just beautiful words? What if tomorrow he forgets? But he didn't forget. Days passed. They met more and more often. Walks, movies, evening tea by the river. Sometimes they held hands. Sometimes Daniel looked too long, as if he couldn't get enough. But always in secret. He didn't want anyone from his world to know about Lyra. This is temporary, he said. I'll figure it out and then turned out to be a fairy tale that Lyra was afraid to believe in. One evening he unexpectedly called. Lyra, I need to see you. Now. Did something happen? Her heart clenched. Please, I'm just coming. 10 minutes later he arrived. Eyes red, breathing rapid. He didn't sit down. He just took her face in his hands and whispered, I need you, and kissed her softly. But in that kiss was the whole truth of their feelings. Fear, tenderness, and impossibility. Lyra buried her hands in his hair, responding just as passionately. He pressed her to himself as if afraid to lose her. That kiss was forbidden but the most real. When they pulled away, Daniel whispered into her forehead. I'm ready to risk everything for you. Just don't leave me. She pressed him to herself. Never. But somewhere deep down she understood, there would be pain ahead, because love between billions and a modest waitress doesn't forgive weakness. And Daniel's father had already begun his game. The evening at the restaurant Northern Lights was special. Snowy lights, lit with blue and soft gold, seemed like a reflection of the northern sky within the walls. Holiday music played barely audibly, as if specifically so guests could hear each other not only with words but also with hearts. Anya nervously adjusted her apron, although she wasn't actually working as a waitress today. She was invited as a special guest, as the girl who helped open doors to love where before there had only been the deaf fear of loneliness. Mark stood by the window, looking at the snow-covered Neva River. He looked calm, but his fingers trembled slightly, as before the most important conversation of his life. His heart beat louder than the footsteps of guests. Anya approached slowly and stood beside him. Few seconds. Silence. But for her, silence had become the language of love. She turned her face to him, raised her hands and asked in sign language. Are you nervous? Mark smiled uncertainly and answered the same way. I've never been so nervous in my life. She softly touched his palm. I'm with you, Anya whispered. And everything will be fine. He breathed deeply, as if gathering air before a jump, and finally did what he had long wanted. Mark took her hands in his and began speaking aloud, but accompanying each word with careful, though still awkward signs. He wanted her to see his feelings. "Anya, I don't know why it's you, but from the first moment when I saw how you talked to my mom, I understood. I had never met such a person." Her eyes filled with tears. He continued, "You weren't afraid of my mom. You weren't afraid of silence. You weren't afraid to see me as I really am. And I want to be real only with you." His fingers got slightly tangled in the signs, but Anya didn't let him worry. She gently corrected him, helped him show the sign for love correctly. Mark smiled wider. "Yes, love. That's exactly it." He got down on one knee in front of all the guests, in front of his mom, who watched her son with excitement, and held up a small box with a ring to Anya, simple but shining like the snowy light outside the windows. Mark said and signed simultaneously, "Be with me always." Anya covered her face with her hands for a second to hold back tears, then with the same gesture answered, "Yes, always." The room erupted in applause, but one person applauded louder than everyone. Mark's mom. She approached Anya and tenderly hugged her. No words, only touch. Anya responded. Hands spoke louder. "Thank you for your son and for your kindness." Mom smiled. That same warm motherly smile that Mark had so often lacked. Mark stood up and tightly hugged Anya. At that moment a new melody was turned on in the restaurant, quiet as the breath of winter. Anya laid her head on his shoulder and he whispered, "I hear you, even when you're silent." She raised her face to him because love is also a language. They kissed for a long time, tenderly, and even the snow outside the window seemed to stop so as not to miss a second of this moment. This was a new chapter. A chapter in which silence finally spoke. If this story reminded you that love understands even silence, share it with those who always hear your heart, even without words.